Hey and welcome, I'm Hammeh and some big Overwatch lore news for you today. Michael Chu is leaving Blizzard and the Overwatch team. Overwatch's lead writer yesterday in a blog post and also a tweet said that after 20 years with Blizzard he was going for a new challenge. In this video I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happened, my thoughts on what this could mean for Overwatch's Lore and Story, Overwatch 2 and similar, and then a little bit of a look at the legacy that Michael Chu and the Overwatch team have left for Overwatch lore over the last nearly 4 years come this May. Timecodes in the description below if you want to skip. So in a tweet yesterday, Michael Chu has said that after 20 years after first walking through Blizzard's doors, he is moving on to new adventures. Overwatch has been an amazing experience and one that he will treasure forever. Thank you to everyone for your support over the years. So as of that moment, Overwatch's lead writer has gone. Now in a blog post on his own personal website, he does talk a little bit more about his experience. Mainly walking through the doors as a fan, being able to be involved in World of Warcraft and also Diablo, and sharing that he felt fortunate to get to know and interact with the passionate global community that played our Blizzard games. He also discusses his joy at the world of Overwatch and the community and the ability to create and to share and to promote a very, very diverse and inclusive world. And as many of you talking on Twitter to me about this and similar have said, I feel honestly sad and pretty shocked about this. What could all of this mean for Overwatch's Lore and Story moving forward in Overwatch 2? And then finally, having a think about the context of what Michael Chu has done and achieved and how Overwatch lore has changed over the last 3-4 years. I feel that's very important to discuss as well, in terms of thinking not only where we've come from, but where also things might go after this. So what could this mean for Overwatch and Overwatch 2 with Mr. Chu gone? Well, I have a couple of anecdotes and a couple of memories that I'm going to share throughout this video, which I feel are as relevant as they can be to this situation to give some context. In a past life, I say in one way, but in terms of a job I did in the past in another, I found myself very fortunate to be at a AAA game studio, not Blizzard, taking what weren't known as influencers then, because this was over 10 years ago, to go and see a new game. A reboot of a game, a much beloved game franchise in its early stages. The developers were really open with us, and chatting to one of them, and I know this is a snapshot of a viewpoint, I was having a chat with a developer and said that when a game is revealed or announced, in an ideal world or in theory, it's kind of 40 or 50% done, quote unquote. Certainly past the green light stage, where the game is sort of confirmed to be made and is being run and as a project where it's going to be announced to the public. Although of course games can still be cancelled even if they've been announced. See StarCraft Ghost at Blizzard for an example. It got to the stage where press were playing builds of it, builds were available and similar. Take Valorant for example. Riot Games' new free-to-play shooter that we've seen news on, indeed I've made videos on recently. In interviews around that, the developers have said that they have been working on it in pre-production and in theory from anything from sort of 3 to 5 years beforehand. Now, why am I giving these timelines and what does this mean regarding Michael Chu? Well, a lot of you have been thinking, have been asking me, what's going to be happening with Overwatch's lore now? What will happen with Overwatch 2? Should we be concerned? So my gut feeling is that Overwatch 2 is going to be well underway, and I would not be at all surprised if the lore and story part of it and a lot of the writing, if not most of the writing, is pretty much done or close to being done. Now, a little bit of Overwatch history for you. Remember, Overwatch was announced at BlizzCon November 2014. It was released May 2016, 1.5 years later. Overwatch 2 has been announced just as of November 2019. And I'm not saying it's going to be exactly the same as Overwatch, but the way that Jeff Kaplan spoke at BlizzCon 2019 and said we're going to be talking next BlizzCon in 2020 pretty much in a similar way about Overwatch 2 to the way that we're talking about it now. So Jeff pretty much confirmed at BlizzCon 2019 that Overwatch 2 is not going to be out in 2020, and I still don't get why, even with random leaks and things, people speculate that Overwatch 2 will be out in 2020. My thought is that at the very earliest Overwatch 2 might be out, let's say potentially April, May 2021, and we'll see more about it at BlizzCon 2020 later this year. Now, although I cited that example from my experience of a game being 40 to 50% quote done when it's actually announced to the public, still a heck of a lot of work goes on in the time between a game being announced and between a game being actually launched. And of course this process can go wrong and horribly awry. Just look at the development of Anthem recently as an example of that. But I played Overwatch 2, I played what's known as a vertical slice, where we played basically the Rio mission, or a version of the Rio mission. And I'm really sad that I couldn't actually record in-game audio of that, because this didn't come out in many pieces of Overwatch 2 gameplay, but the Overwatch 2 Rio mission that I played was fully voiced. It had a full story, it had lots of in-game voice lines and interactions, lots of banter back and forth between the characters. It felt like a very polished piece of work. Indeed, everything that I would sort of almost expect and love from Blizzard.
We could have used Overwatch the last few years. The world's just been falling apart.
You can sense the Petra's act was at. None of this would have happened if we hadn't been shut down.
But you're heroes. We can't let some politicians tell you what to do. That's not the Overwatch I believed in.
Now, the term vertical slice, if you've not heard of it before, it's kind of a proof of concept, Blizzard-wise, polished up until it's shone, but this term vertical slice is often a term used to describe like a playable piece of gameplay, showing off a game that then gets it greenlit for actual production. It's kind of like the portfolio piece, the example of what could be done, and then a lot of work has gone and done to sort of, make that actually a reality. The talent system we saw obviously in place to a small degree, the different customization as to the hero abilities you could use. So if at the very earliest Overwatch 2 is, and I'm completely speculating here based on what I've told you here, and a lot of work is still to be done behind the scenes, I can't help but think that from what I saw at BlizzCon, that a lot of the story and lore work may have already been done. And indeed, Blizzard have talked about this in terms of Overwatch's actual development. If you don't watch the BlizzCon virtual ticket panels, there was a really great one a couple of years back where Jeff talked about the timeline of Overwatch's actual development and seeing from Titan through to it being confirmed by Activision, how it all came together and the timeframes in which it came together. Now, developers do work on development cycles and on timelines, so having a look at the timeline here, some of the footage of which I'm showing now, we can totally see that I would expect Blizzard would hope to work to a similar-ish timeline for Overwatch 2. Maybe we'll see it in 2021. And if so, then a big bunch of the lore and story already has to be done, is the point that I'm making here. Now, if you're a regular and devoted viewer of this channel and a lot of my little updates and things over the last couple of years, you'll have seen that the Overwatch team has been hiring. You'll know of Alyssa Wong's hiring, a Nebula, a winning short story author. Fantastic stories, do go and check them out. Now writing for Marvel as well. There have been other hires on the Overwatch team, at least I think one more, on the dedicated Overwatch writing team. This is also all before the wider story and franchise team at Blizzard. Not all of the names on the comics that you probably know and love, and that I know and love, certainly before Overwatch launched, were Michael Chu indeed. There are a bunch of talented writers at Blizzard who work as part of a central sort of story and franchise and narrative team, who work on various different titles, including World of Warcraft, including StarCraft, and of course Overwatch as well. So there is a whole bunch of continuity and talent at Overwatch and at Blizzard in place. There is, of course, going to be a hero at some point this year or between now and Overwatch 2's launch, so I think we should all keep an eye out for that. A whole bunch of topics and things for short stories that Michael Chu and indeed Alyssa Wong have started, and that process I'm sure will continue. Writing for heroes and similar will happen as well. So I think there's a lot that's already been done both for Overwatch 2 and also foundations have been put in place by Michael Chu over the last few years, and the hiring an additional talent joining Overwatch's dedicated narrative team, even outside of the wider Blizzard narrative team and story, franchise and development team as well. So with that context, with the context of the time of game development, my speculation and thoughts around that, I feel that Overwatch's lore and story has been put in good hands, and it has been in good hands, and it has been built and changed a lot. Now, things, of course, have been a bit quieter on Overwatch's lore and story front over the last year and a half or so. People will say, oh, not as many comics, the animated shorts have slowed down and things like that. Overwatch 2's development, I feel, gives some context as to why that is the case. But I do want to step back and take a bit of a look as to how Overwatch story and lore has changed over the last 3 and 4 years since its launch, and the context of what Michael Chu and the Overwatch team have kind of done and achieved, because I feel that's important in terms of seeing where Overwatch Lore and Story has come from and also where it might be going as well. And of course Michael Chu's big, huge role in all of that over the last years and how it will move forward as well, even though he's no longer with the company now. So if you've made it this far, then second anecdote or thought, and this is an interesting one for me. When Overwatch launched in May 2016, I feel like I can tell this now because it's a few years on, I had the privilege of chatting to some of the devs who were there for various interviews and things with the UK press. Then I was kind of Hammeh the YouTuber. My channel was kind of slowly just about to sort of blow up. But I was there with multiple hats on, and I wasn't there as a content creator in the way that I would be if I went to a Blizzard event now, for example. So I had the opportunity to chat with some of the devs, and one thing that really struck me when I talked to them about the lore and story was that one person said the reaction to it has been so amazing, and this was when Overwatch launched, and they said people are consuming it faster than we can produce it. And that comment has stuck with me. Since then, this has been discussed in different ways, so this is why I feel comfortable sharing this now. But this was specifically related to the story. Now, I think maybe when people can chat with Jeff Kaplan or Michael Chu and look back on Overwatch in, say, like 10 years' time when it's a little bit less current, we'll hear an interesting story. We've already heard about the success it had, and I think that this sort of somewhat unexpected element as to how Blizzard then had to try and sustain and build on the success and the phenomenon that Overwatch became and is. That's going to be an interesting story, and it's one that Blizzard have already kind of talked about in various different forms, in stuff that you can see publicly. This theme of doing more or the same amount but with less or more efficiently has been a theme of Blizzard talks. If you follow the BlizzCon virtual ticket panels, if you watch Blizzard developers talking at GDC about the technical elements of Overwatch and other things. One great example that people may have seen publicly and otherwise is animated shorts and the animations and the cinematics team at Blizzard talking about Overwatch animated shorts. Now, some of these panels in the past have been locked behind the BlizzCon virtual ticket, but there was one around the launch of various Overwatch cinematics at Gamescom, for example. One example that always strikes me is the team talking about the animated short Infiltration and just the technicality and what they needed to do with Reaper's smoke effect when we see him doing his Wraith walk. How technically complex that is, how expensive it is in terms of processing and development time, in terms of rendering, in terms of getting machinery and software to produce the look of that effect, and how they had to find hacky techniques to make the smoke look great but reduce the amount of technical and time cost that it took to actually just make that one effect in that one animated short. In other animated short panels, the team has also talked about how the initial Overwatch launch cinematic from BlizzCon 2014 is cited as being a thing of beauty and of a labour of love, but also something that took a lot of time and a lot of money and a sort of technical and human time to make. And if we wanted more story more often, then they'd have to find ways of doing that in more efficient and quicker ways, while still delivering things that we'd enjoy.
But what many of you may not realize is that cinematic took over 12 months of pre-production and production from start to finish, and required over 300 man-months of artist labor. Regardless of the cost, it was really clear from the community reaction that the fans wanted more. And when Blizzard got together with the heads of the department, they had one simple question: how do we tell more stories? The answer, unfortunately, is never as simple, and the road we took to get from there to here is predominantly what we'll be talking about in today's panel.
We then got, with the launch of Junkertown the Plan, using the in-game engine to tell the story a little bit more. Overwatch 2, I feel, and it'll be interesting to see what's happened. I never got this question away at BlizzCon last year, but it seems from some of the little bits of footage we've seen that is a polished up version of working with the in-game engine on cinematics, rather than the rendered stuff of the Overwatch animated shorts that we've seen. So again, it's another way of delivering more story in a more efficient way that still looks fantastic and is enjoyable. I really enjoyed my experience and seeing all of the in-game cinematics and chatter at BlizzCon playing the Rio level. So, taking a step back and giving all of that context, at launch, around before Overwatch's launch and just after, there was a huge wave of content, loads of animated shorts, loads of comics. It produced this huge phenomenon, this huge world and story that we all got really engaged with. And then for Blizzard, it was then what's next and how we continue from that. Towards the end of 2016, when Overwatch launched, there was also the fact that Chris Metzen left Blizzard. In many ways, a huge presence, a huge figure, influence and creative part of the StarCraft, Warcraft universes. At the unveiling of Overwatch in 2014, let's not forget, he was there beside and introducing Jeff Chris Metzen, so key and pivotal in so many things Blizzard, and particularly to do with story. For those of you new to Blizzard games with Overwatch, the Overwatch team obviously had Chris Metzen involved. Obviously with Project Titan, he was involved as he would be with everything Blizzard-wise for many, many years beforehand. Certainly standing on the shoulders of giants to work on any story that he's worked on, but also a big shadow to step into, if not shoes to fill. You could see in mid to late 2016, Blizzard were working out what to do with Overwatch's story, I feel. There was, of course, First Strike, and I see this as being a pivotal turning point in Overwatch's story and how it was delivered and worked on, and has been worked on till this day. First Strike, of course, a 100-page graphic novel. The writer, the artist, both tweeted on Twitter that the writing was complete, the art was very nearly complete, a lot of it was shared. And then it was very abruptly cancelled after Overwatch's launch. It had been talked about at the San Diego Comic-Con. The cover art had been revealed. The reason that was given by Michael Chu, and this was when he was stepping more into the foreground, indeed, from launch onwards, he was stepping more into the foreground in terms of being the lead writer or the sort of key go-to developer for interviews on writing and story on Overwatch, was that they wanted to explore developing the world and universe of Overwatch in other ways. Now, taking a step back, and at the time when I analysed this in my video, I was thinking that basically we'd seen a trend of Blizzard interviews where GF and other developers had said, right, well, the Overwatch world and story, we love how enthusiastic people are about it. We see ourselves as being the custodians and sort of looking after the universe, but it's something that people grow and shape and think about in their own ways as a community and as fans. This was a trend of interviews during 2016 before First Strike was actually cancelled. And I think that from Chris Metzen leaving, from Michael Chu stepping forward, and from also the cancellation of First Strike, which I believe was a Blizzard-wide decision and not an individual's decision for sure. This is the environment into which Michael Chu and the Overwatch team have been changing and telling the story over the last few years. Around the same time, the Overwatch League was kicking off. We saw many big Overwatch deals being signed. Hasbro, Funko Pop, toys, statues, Nerf, the merchandising train for Overwatch, and indeed the huge brands like Lego who have got involved with Overwatch, meant that story and lore and the universe was always going to be something that was going to be developed in different ways. And I think there was a decision made at some point that Overwatch 2 is going to be the way that we do that. The community had been asking for co-op for single player since the launch of Overwatch and beyond. I want to play co-op Overwatch, single player Overwatch. And I think probably, it'll be interesting to know when in future, but probably from a pretty early stage after Overwatch launch, there was a decision made, we're going to work on Overwatch 2. And Overwatch 2 has been in the pipeline for, I think, probably a lot longer than we would think. So, interesting things there. Now, let's look, with all of that background that I've given for so long, Michael Chu stepped forward into this. Indeed, he was working on this and then stepped forward into this. And then he put his mark on it, and he developed lore and story in the ways that he could with all of this going on, including the development of Overwatch 2. In-game voice lines and interactions became more of a thing. The short stories that we've come to know and enjoy over the past year or so, along with the events. Blogs and other storytelling happened outside of game around hero releases. Overwatch archives, we've had Retribution, we have had, of course, Uprising, and all of the voice work and writing that have gone into those and telling and expanding Overwatch's story. All of the cool work with and championing of Overwatch's voice actors and talent that he has done. With all of this context, I feel that looking back in the last 3 or 4 years, people have judged Overwatch and Overwatch's lore, and therefore Mr. Chu's work on kind of the volume of lore and how that's changed, the delivery of lore, and the consistency. I think they're the 3 things that when people discuss Overwatch lore, if they have strong views either way, they talk about. In terms of volume of lore, I've always said, I think comparing to the launch period, as we often have, this was a Blizzard thing, and certainly not a personal responsibility of one man, woman, or person in any way, shape, or form. Blizzard launched with a huge amount of work. They were, I think, a little bit surprised exactly how well Overwatch went down and how the lore, story, and world became such a real phenomenon at the time, and indeed are still now to a degree. And I go back to that quote that I remember from talking to a developer when it launched. People are enjoying this, people are consuming this at more of a rate than we can make it. I feel that's a very, very important thing to share, and I feel it gives context to a lot of how Overwatch has been since, particularly with the development of Overwatch 2. Look at Blizzard, look at the team's work, look at Michael Chu's work on lore, and everyone who's worked on Overwatch Lore a little bit more kindly, I feel, in response to that. Also for the delivery of lore, people have sort of said, oh, tweets, forum posts talking about things. I feel that, when Jeff has done this in the past and in news articles, he was praised for it. Michael obviously also did this and got a bit of flack for it at points. What I would say is that if you can't release a cinematic, give an interview, write a comic or a short story every 5 minutes, and you can't, where do you share things? You don't want to be quiet. So I've always been relatively happy when little bits of lore have popped up on the forums, in interviews, in tweets, and I've always, as you know, on this channel tried to keep a track of it all as best as I can, being a repository for it in many different ways. Now, consistency is a third thing, something that often Blizzard have been criticised for, not just in Overwatch over the last 4 years, but also in their other stories and worlds and universes. In World of Warcraft, StarCraft and Diablo, this is nothing new. If you tell stories over a long period of time, people will sort of talk about retconning, they'll talk about changes to the story. And there's a great quote from Terry Pratchett that I'll come to at the end of this, which I feel really sums up all of this very well for me, and I feel it's a great way to look at it and approach it, however much you enjoy or love a story or a fictional world or universe. My view has always been that consistency is a team thing. It's a group, it's a joint effort, and I feel that at times, and I will need to check sure that I'm not retconning my own opinions or I'm not being revisionist historically wise in my own opinions and what I've said. I'll go check my Diva Lore StarCraft video for that. But in terms of changing things, I often felt that Michael Chu was trying to get and create consistency and a path forward from a lot of different perspectives. And also, when a lot of other developers talk about lore and story in the universe of Overwatch, and they say stuff that is then taken as canon by people like me, when maybe in the past I shouldn't have at points, I'll put my hands up and say that. Michael Chu often had the unenviable job, and whoever steps forward as being responsible or the figurehead for Overwatch Lore and Story, they will have an unenviable job of sort of corralling what developers say. Like if Jeff goes ahead and says something, and then people start citing that, and then you say, well, actually, this is how things are in the story, this is how we've always had them. The fact that a developer has said something, I feel that Michael often had to run around and tidy up a lot of that kind of stuff said by both Chris Metzen, by Jeff, and by also other people as well, in terms of creating a consistent path forward. I'll cite a quick couple of examples. It wasn't necessarily all, I think, his to be judged upon, and he did a lot of work that I feel we'll see the benefits of in the year and in Overwatch 2 to come, in terms of putting things on a path and making it consistent to go forward. Ideas, however they get into the community, they get repeated, they get sort of discussed, they get sort of adopted, and then how Blizzard then, whether it was an intention or not, whether it was a thing or not, then have to manage community expectations and try and keep things on a course, whether they build it in or whether they don't. It's kind of a no-win situation for Blizzard or someone looking after a story in these ways. Now, the Diva StarCraft thing, let me just say, that was directly referred to in several interviews by people. So that correction, or retcon, however you want to call it, was definitely a correctional retcon based off things that other developers had said. So I feel that Michael Chu was the messenger in many ways, that, as I've mentioned, he was trying to sort and pull together and make Overwatch's lore and story and the past for things, the histories of the characters, more consistent for a way forward from what they've been before. And he was kind of being shot for that one, I feel, from what other developers had actually sort of said before him. Now, I know that in the Overwatch community there has been a lot of, oh, Blizzard have retconned this, they've changed that. To finish up, this all I feel strongly, very, very strongly, comes from a place of how much we all are engaged and care with the story. Because we care, because we love the ideas and things so much, whether they're ideas that we ourselves have sort of, had, we've headcanoned, we've sort of speculated about, and Lord knows how much I've speculated about Overwatch and its lore and story in the past. Sometimes those speculations get into people's thoughts and they love the ideas, and then Blizzard, maybe that's not the story that they were going to tell. And in this space of ambiguity where so much is unknown and not laid down in canonical documents such as short stories, The Hero of Nimbani from Nikki Drayden, which I'm sure Michael Chu would have been working with Nikki Drayden in terms of advising on the lore and story around which she's then written. These canonical documents that are sort of put down in terms of bios, in terms of comics, in terms of sources of lore and canon, as it were, anything not around those that has sort of room for speculation or mystery, we love to speculate about, and then Blizzard have to work out how they go with it. It's a tough position to be in, being the curator of a universe, of an organic story and world in many ways that so many people engage with, speculate, create content around, write their own fan fiction around and enjoy as well. Not an easy job, whoever's doing it. So fair play to Michael Chu for that. But as I've said, like, the reason why there's been a lot, I feel, of conflict, of speculation, of sort of questioning and things is because we all care and are interested in it so much and have been. And hopefully, if you're here, still are. Now, on the other side of the fence, dealing with these existing conceptions, whether they've been created or whether they're things that we sort of ourselves have brought up, not wanting to upset people, wanting to do creative things, move things forward, not being able to please everybody, people who are very passionate about it and very invested in such a thing. It's certainly a big challenge. It's sad for Overwatch and the community that Michael Chu is gone. It's not the beginning of the end by any means. It's not the end. It could be the end of the beginning if we're going Winston Churchill. We have a new hero coming, I think, sometime pretty soon. We have Overwatch 2, the rumours of an animated series, Netflix or otherwise. We have the first Overwatch novel, The Hero of Numbani, out this year, which I'm really excited for, by Nikki Drayden. That's going to be great. Short stories that we've seen, hopefully those continue. The comics have been said by Jeff multiple times to be starting up again. So, a big shock for us all, myself included. As I've said, I'm sad about it. I think it's important to, as I have been in this video a little bit, look back and reflect a bit on the last 3 or 4 years. I'm going to leave you with a Terry Pratchett quote. Now, I need to check back 4 years of Twitter. I'm pretty sure that a conversation with Michael Chu at some point on Twitter, or I've seen that he's a Terry Pratchett fan. I've loved Terry Pratchett for absolutely ages. Sir Terry, God rest his soul. And it reminds me of a quote from one of my favourite books that my mum actually gave me as a Christmas present, called The Fifth Elephant. In it, Sam Vimes, one of the key characters of the City Watch in Ankh-Morpork of the Discworld series, is talking to the Dwarven Low King, the King of the Dwarves. And the Dwarven King is giving him a lesson about continuity in the face of change, about current events against future events. And there, he has this wonderful quote about an axe. And it goes, "This, my lord, is my family's axe. We have owned it for almost 900 years. Of course, sometimes it needed a new blade, and sometimes it required a new handle. New designs on the metalwork, a little refreshing of the ornamentation. But is this not the 900-year-old axe of my family? And because it has changed gently over time, it's still a pretty good axe, you know. Pretty good." I've always really loved that quote in terms of describing that, even in the midst of big change and short-term events and things like that, that still things endure and still things continue. There is legacy, there is continuity. And if things are made well, and if they're sort of, you know, changed a little bit here and there, then things go on. For example, look at the story of Warcraft, and indeed StarCraft, and indeed Diablo. Those have been around for over a decade, and they are still alive and well and healthy and enjoyed by people, passionately debated, sometimes disagreed with, sometimes agreed with, but still kicking on, very much like the axe of the king's grandfather. So, because of that, whatever your views on specific parts of the story and on how things have done, how maybe Blizzard as a company have worked on it over the last few years, the future, I feel, is bright. And that is in no small part due to the work that Mr. Chu has done. So I will very much say, personally, thank you very much, Michael. I hope you have a great break in between, whatever your next adventure is. I hope you have some time off. You definitely deserve it. Thank you for all of the hard work and caring and, honestly, sometimes patience with the Overwatch community, certainly with myself, in terms of me sitting here having a look at your work. And you have created and helped create things that matter a lot to so many people in so many different ways, and that they and myself get very passionate about because they engage us and because we care, and that's a hell of a Overwatch legacy. So thank you. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you like this, throw a like, subscribe, comment with what you think. What do you think about Overwatch's lore going forward? Are you concerned for Overwatch 2? Are you sort of optimistic with all of the new different things that might be coming? I, for one, certainly am. I think it's going to be an interesting few weeks and months ahead in the world of Overwatch, so keep an eye out for that. I'm actually in the midst of creating a bunch of new Overwatch videos, as well as videos on other stuff as well. I'm going to be doing a pilot month of new content, so check the playlist here for all of my Overwatch lore interactions and voice lines, as well as all of the new content that I'm going to be making too, just for this month. So don't unsubscribe if it's stuff that you don't quite fancy. Give it a go, watch the things you fancy, let me know what you think's good, what's not. I'd love to hear all your thoughts. Big thanks to my patrons on Patreon who have made, over the last few years, a lot of my videos and indeed all of this new stuff possible. Now, my Patreon is actually paused at the moment as I give it a bit of a revamp and as we do this pilot month, but you can check it out if you'd like to support the channel at patreon.com/Hammeh. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.